everybody. My name is Stanley. Welcome back to Challenge of Faith. And today we have a very special episode. We are talking to the owner of the account on Instagram that has over 334,000 followers, called Preachers and Sneakers. I guarantee you've seen them on your Explore page, or you've seen them on your feed. Maybe you even follow them. They are incredibly talented and they do a very important work. And so today we're going to be talking about Preachers and Sneakers, the vision for the account, and also really just almost being the watchdog of the Christian faith in the churches, especially mega pastors. So, Kate, welcome to the show. Do you mind doing a brief intro for our guests who maybe don't know you?
Sure, Stanley. Thanks for having me here. I'm delighted to join you tonight. But yes, I'm Kate Martin, and I've recently taken over the Preachers and Sneakers account from Ben Kirby, who was the founder and is really the mastermind behind what it's become today. I'm only a couple of months in and really very vaguely, slightly in as far as content goes, but thrilled to be here and talk about, wealth and the church, really.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's unique timing because we recently did part 1 of the business of church. We have part 2 coming soon.
I listen, it's great, so everyone should go listen.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it. And it was so unique because we had a lot of feedback from people who were non-believers, some people who were believers. We were even talking about before, I was mentioning I got a DM from somebody who I went to church with for a long time who even asked me like, hey, did you walk away from your faith? And I was like, no, not at all. But they got to actually listen to the episode and went, hey, this is actually really important. I never thought of it this way and never really perceived it. So anyways, I'm so grateful that you're here. Like you said, you just recently took over Preachers and Sneakers. Talk to me about that transition. Talk to me about getting that account. What was the drive behind that, the vision? Just unpack that for me a little bit.
Well, I got to tell you, the initial story was really the reason that this account is in my hands feels it feels like there's a little bit of divine intervention, for lack of a better term, but coincidence. I don't really believe in coincidence purely, in and of itself, but Ben Kirby and I happened to go to the same church, didn't know each other at all, and this was probably, almost 9 months ago now, that I was serving in the kids ministry one Sunday evening at the 4 p.m. service, and I joked that I probably didn't want to be there. I was, tired at the end of the week, but I went and was, participating, and my role that day was to pass out stickers to the kids as they came in and greet the families. This guy walks up, and I'm like, how do I know this guy? And it hit me after a couple of seconds, and I looked at the person next to me, and I was like, is that the Preachers and Sneakers guy? And they're like, looking at me like, what are you talking about? We don't have a clue. So I was like, let me go up to him and ask him. So I went up to Ben, tapped him on the shoulder, and was like, Preachers and Sneakers? And he was like, yes, but no one ever recognizes me, which, embarrassed me a little. I'm feeling awkward and, trying not to fangirl. But we spoke for, 3 or 4 minutes, and he had little kids running around him at the time. And he said, I'm not posting as much as you can see. I've got kids. It's not the season in life for this. And so, yeah, I get it. And then we parted ways. So no exchange of anything. But it was truly like a week and a half later that Ben posted on Instagram that he was trying to find someone to take over the platform. And I naturally was like, well, I have to write him because no one ever recognizes him. Like, he will remember me. We go to the same church, so I figured I'd get a response. And I wrote him, had a response within, 60 seconds or so. And we set up a time for coffee. And that's kind of how we started talking, and kept getting together with he and his wife over the next couple of months, and finally kind of came to an agreement on this is what it could look like, and I want to be part of it. So I'm honored to now, be behind the scenes with Preachers and Sneakers and get to steward its platform, but it's very much still in the works.
Yeah. Well, walk me through a little bit of your vision, right? Because I feel like this is a big undertaking. It's not like it's a small account. As an account that has a ton of impact, a ton of swing. It's done a really wonderful job over the years of, I think, exposing some things that maybe believers didn't know were there. Definitely non-believers, I think, had no idea. And so you have the courage to take this on, to meet with Ben, to go through the process. What is your vision for Preachers and Sneakers in the account moving forward?
Well, I was saying to you before we got started, I kind of opened the account once I had it, and I just felt this kind of overwhelm of like, wow, I now have this responsibility, to ideally preach the word in a way, and to say things that are true and right and good, I hope. And ideally do it in a way that's fun and entertaining and encouraging, and but that really centers on this idea of wealth in the church, because if nothing else, Preachers and Sneakers has absolutely identified this, call it a concern, call it a, just this has this pulse on, like, people care about this subject of money or materialism, or however you want to look at it in that light. And I think, quite frankly, Jesus cared about that subject too, and which is why I feel so strongly about it. How we manage our money and how we steward our lives is, to me, the heart behind Preachers and Sneakers, and just trying to figure out how do we kind of display that going forward.
Yeah, I love what you said about stewarding the money and managing our lives. And I think for a lot of believers, and maybe even non-believers that are watching this or listening to this, they're thinking about the single mom, right, who's having a hard time paying her mortgage this month or putting food on the table for the kids, or the single dad who doesn't know how he's going to make it. And then you look at some of these things, and like an example would be like Ed Young, for example, who I recently read had over a six-figure housing allowance. And when you read about that, it's so, I think, frustrating for some folks, because it goes, how is this in alignment with what Jesus taught? Where did we see this modeled in the New Testament, right? Because I think it's a dangerous place as a believer to allow my personal skew, my personal opinion to get involved. Because one of the things I always like to say is, like, how much is too much or how much is enough? Well, how much is too much is always just that little bit more.
Right.
Right. It's like, I love that one investor who said, when they asked him how much money is too much money, right? He had a couple billion. He said, just a little bit more. And I feel like for a lot of people out there, it goes, well, where is the line then? Right. So is it wrong for a pastor to make, say, $1 million a year, $150,000 a year, right? Because if I'm a billionaire, $1 million a year doesn't feel like that much. But if I make 50,000, a million's a game changer, right? So where would you describe the line being for the pastor today in regards to compensation?
Whew. I don't know that I'm going to draw a line for you, but I do like the question itself is a good one, and I think the church should be asking and should be paying attention to it. I mean, there's so many pieces to your question that I want to hit on, but I think where I land on it is that it is complex, and I think a pastor in the heart of Dallas, Texas, or in the heart of Los Angeles is living a very different life than pastor in a suburban area with a congregation of 50 people. But I think that's true of me too. Like I was in a college town before I moved to Dallas, and my lifestyle, my entire, like, my budget, everything was impacted not only by necessarily income, but by what I saw around me, by like the actual cost of living there. The fact I've now lived in Dallas for a couple of years, and I live near one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the country. And so all of a sudden I find myself, like, tempted by these beautiful cars and these beautiful homes, and not just tempted, but just like, oh, that's the standard. That's just what I do here. That's how I live. And it's certainly not a perfect answer to your question, but I think that is an angle of the conversation, is that to draw a line is, like, impossible, even from the standpoint of, the different areas will dictate different, needs, I guess.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I think it's incredibly difficult. And I think that's almost a tension point for a lot of believers and non-believers, right? Because I think if I go down the road of, like, we had a guest recently who said, I don't even think pastors should get paid at all. And he was like, I think that is like, and in my mind, I thought, well, that's kind of wild. That feels extreme. But it was interesting. The DMs that I've gotten and the comments that I've gotten were overwhelmingly that way, saying, I don't think they should get paid at all. I think they should have a side job. They should have a side hustle of some sort. But in some way, because I've been so close to ministry for so long, I know a lot of pastors who do this full time. And many times they are working 24/7, 365. They're in the hospitals with sick people at night. They're picking up the phone calls for suicide people. I mean, there's so many things. There's not a clock in, clock out job. And at some point, like, I look at the pastor who I go to his church now, he's got 4 kids and a wife. and he's pastoring in a wealthy area. But one of the challenges that he faces is he was very open. How am I supposed to buy a house in the market that I'm called to be? And I'm curious, where is that line? And like I said, you don't have to have that answer, but I want to have that conversation so much because I really think people are wrestling with that.
I think that's fair. I mean, you make a great point. I actually heard you, I think it was maybe the last episode that y'all released, like mentioned that concept. And funny enough, when I was in Charlottesville, Virginia, I was part of a church plant, and the vision for the church was actually to be a like bivocational congregation. So no one would be on staff. It would be entirely volunteer run, so that, you know, to your point, again, there's like zero operational costs to some degree, you know, so at least as far as salaries go. And I love that idea. Part of me still loves that idea, and like was even just looking at my own life, could have seen, you know, a vision where, okay, I'm in the marketplace, and then I'm also just like really serving religiously and regularly here. But I will say, it's exhausting. And to your point about the pastors who are 24/7 always on, like it's not just maybe it's perception of like it's a soft job, or like that's, I don't know if I ever heard that term. That's how maybe people perceive it, as like highly relational, or I don't know the right term, but there's a lot that goes into it, and even the weight of leadership.
That's right.
There's something to that too. That doesn't say you need to make, you know, more than any business owner or any fill in the blank, but it does mean that I think you should be compensated for your work.
I love that you're saying that, because I think for a lot of folks who maybe follow the page, they might have a completely different vantage point. I mean, frankly, before I got to meet you, hear more about your story, I thought, man, this person is hardcore, maybe against the pastors having money, against people making a comp package of some sort. But that's not your heart. It doesn't feel like. I'm curious about your vision, right? So you have this page. You talked about kind of the overwhelming, that sense of weight that landed on your shoulders when you opened up the account. What is kind of your vision for the page moving forward?
Sure. Well, before I answer that, the one thing I would say too is just alongside that idea of whatever the comp package is for the pastors, my big question is always, you know, how are we presenting the gospel? That has been my biggest, you know, I followed the account for years, and like would be entertained by it, would also feel some unease by it, would feel a little bit of like defense go up of like, wait, I listened to this pastor and I like agree with them. So like, why are they being questioned? You know, so kind of a range of emotions. But the question that I keep coming back to, particularly now, is like, okay, if I am a pastor, if I'm anyone really, I'll get into this, but me getting on stage and presenting, like, is there anything distracting about my appearance that would take away from this gospel message that I am called to preach? You know, and now I'm not going to give a hard line yes or no answer to that, because again, I think it sometimes varies. And like, if you go into a community that's like very, you know, integrated into, you know, nice brands and beautiful people and things, and, you know, like, not to be that might be more distracting than to be it.
Interesting.
Does that make sense? You know, like,
Yeah.
for me, like I'm pretty simple, pretty straightforward, you know. This is about what you're going to get on any given day. And so if what I'm looking for, I love my pastor at my church, is I can predict every Sunday what he's going to wear. It's like jeans and a pullover button down, you know, but that fits my life. You know, so anyways, I'm a little bit on a tangent there, but I just note that. As far as the vision for Preachers and Sneakers, it's ever evolving. I'll say that. What I want it to accomplish is to maintain this conversation that's started and is happening around wealth in the church. And I think that there are some very legitimate questions that are being asked. I mean, even around the comp packages, or around where, you know, do you need this? Like, is this the right car to drive? Is this the right? But I don't think it's a simple yes or no. And to that end, another thing that I sort of feel called to is like, how do we examine ourselves as we kind of call out these pastors? Like, what's my heart behind calling them out? Is it envy, or is it legitimate, like, I know the word to say this and I believe it says this, and so, like, hey, let me point this out to you, or is it a lot of, have we taken the log out of our own eyes before we take the speck out of our brother's eyes? Because again, we were saying this before we started, like, some of these ministries, many of them, there's fruit from these ministers who have been featured on Preachers and Sneakers. So that for me is like, it's kind of drawing a box of, like, there's a lot of maybe right answers, there's a lot of truths that this is identified, and what I would love to do is maybe have a more robust conversation around it, to lean in and answer the questions wrong, but to talk about these things, because I don't want to make anyone stop. No one wants to make anyone's. We're called not to make our fellow believers or non-believers. Well, I don't know where we land on that, but we're called to live a life that is worthy of the calling we've received. And a lot of that has to do with, again, I think, examining ourselves. So, Preachers and Sneakers, to me, the way I'm envisioning it is, I want to be a preacher in sneakers. In fact, I think every single believer is called to be a preacher in sneakers. And if you believe you're called to preach the gospel, and sneakers for me, personally, is your kind of casual everyday shoe. Your sneakers could be these actual sneakers I'm wearing. It could be cowboy boots. I mean, I live in Texas, and so I think that's when I think about the term. It's like, I want it to be I think it should be a positive, kind of connotation, not like, oh, these preachers in sneakers, like on stage blowing it, or however that you want to phrase it. And to that end, I would make the case that Jesus was the perfect preacher in sneakers.
That's right.
And so we're all aspiring to live lives that represent him, that, how do we live out the gospel well?
Yep. So I was preparing for this morning, and I was in my quiet time, and I was just asking the Lord to help guide me in what we needed to talk about. And one of the things I was thinking about was Jesus's ministry. And I love what you just said about he was a perfect example of it. And one of the things that the Holy Spirit showed me that I'd never seen before until this morning was Jesus throughout his entire ministry was constantly under scrutiny, constantly under the Pharisees and the Sadducees, looking for any possible angle they could get on him being not the Messiah, getting him to trip up. You see him questioning him with very difficult things. One of the things that you never one time see in the New Testament is them go, he is a man of opulent wealth who's flashy and showy. You never see them take an angle of criticism with him about him making anyone else feel less than. He never made the tax collector feel less than, but he also simultaneously never made the prostitute or the blind man or the beggar feel less than. And so I think, to your point, what the Holy Spirit was showing me there was, I think you need to be the preacher in sneakers. And it's metaphorically, obviously, but what you're really, if I'm understanding your heart, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, I love what you said. Don't be the stumbling block.
Right.
Don't be the stumbling block to a brother or a sister in Christ, or to one who's not. We want everyone to get to the Lord. And, the scripture talks about, as blessed is the peacemaker, right? And he talks about the devil is divisive, and the devil creates chaos and disunity. And I don't view Preachers in Sneakers as a divisive page, but I'm curious what you would say to someone who does. If I'm a believer out there specifically, and I'm going, I feel like, I follow this page, maybe they are an attendant of, one of the pastors who's been featured. What would your message be to that believer and non-believer who's looking at it and going, I feel like this page is not helpful. I feel like it's hurtful.
That's a great question. And honestly, it excites me, because it makes me think of all the opportunity that there is to continue having conversations around the page. But I guess I think of it like pretty optimistically in either side. Maybe there's hope in either answer, for the believer. But I do think it all comes back to kind of like starting with questioning myself. And so, like, for the believer that feels like it's divisive, which again was me at times, is me at times when I see it, because the posts have effectively been, here's the preacher, here's the price. And that's kind of the extent of it. And it's funny, it's even the one, if I disagree or agree, like I can just objectively say this is funny.
Yeah.
But I think the question to ask is like, why am I so offended by this? Because that'll tell you a lot. Is it because like I feel concerned that like the faith can't stand up against this criticism? Is it because I listen to this pastor and I feel like they're being, wrongfully accused or wrongfully, tried, or however you want to say it? Is it, I don't know. Is it because I'd like to be able to go to that church? Is it because I'd like to, I don't know, fill in the blank. I'm running out of questions, but kind of examining myself, like, why do I feel this way? And then on the flip side, for non-believers who see it and are just like, this is why I hate Christians, this is why I hate the church. I mean, I guess I understand where they're coming from in a lot of ways. Like, it is hard to reckon with that. But at the same time, like, it's just a taste of what, like, the big C church actually is. Like, that's where it's hard for me. Like, if what you know about Jesus is this account, I just don't know that you've dug in enough to really make a decision on this. Because give me any other facet of life that you would take a 3-second clip. And maybe we do that these days. Honestly, maybe we do. Social media and whatever. I guess we're constantly like pulling short ideas and clips and whatever. And I hate this. I hate this. I hate this. Or I disagree with this. I shouldn't say hate, but I would invite them to look a little deeper, because Jesus talks about money. He talks about, wealth constantly. And to your point, caring about those who have and don't have. And quite frankly, if you just look at the account, and you can see that there are Christians who are equally frustrated by it. So like, that should give you some encouragement also, just in that alone. Yeah. So, but I guess that is the like heart of the account, is that we like hate and love talking about money. It impacts everything we do. I don't think the church talks about it enough. It is a legitimate, daily battle or victory, or however you want to describe it for people. But like it or not, it's there. It is so, it's just part of life. Anyways, I'm getting long-winded here.
No, it's fantastic. I love what you said. I mean, one of the roles, and I do want to be careful that I don't brand it, right? Because I want you to be able to do that. And so feel free to direct this. But one of the things that when I look at the page historically and now, I look at it almost as a watchdog in a way. And I view the church and I view pastors oftentimes as, in many people's minds, above reproach. We view them as almost Christ-like figures rather than human beings that teach Christ's messages. And one of the things that we had mentioned before we started talking was the fact that, I've been in the faith long enough to be offended multiple times by pastors of all different types. And one of the things that I'm blessed to be at a place in my faith now where a pastor can hurt my feelings, can create an offense, but I never attribute the offense to God. I attribute it to the person. Right. And so one of the things that I think your page does a brilliant job of is being a watchdog. I think it does a great job of calling things out and saying, hey, here's the outfit. Here's how much it costs. But I've not seen posts going, isn't this terrible? It's just, here's the facts.
Right.
And it's almost like, do with that information as you want. And I think that there's a piece that's missing in the big C church, as you put it, of almost that investigative journalism, that kind of going behind the scenes, asking the tough questions, hence this podcast, Challenge the Faith. The whole idea of this podcast is to do that exact thing. And so I feel a real kindred spirit to you and really your mission of saying, hey, Michael Todd can have a wonderful platform. He can lead thousands of people to Christ every single year. He can do amazing discipleship. And I guarantee if you go in his church, there's people's lives that are better because of the role he is in now. But maybe we talk about the outfit. Maybe we talk about pouring syrup on the Bible. Maybe we talk about Ed Young driving a Rolls Royce on stage. Maybe we talk about a $700,000 retirement package. Like, maybe we have these conversations because they're not being had.
Right.
And so, like I said, I don't want to brand it, but would you say that that would be in alignment with a little bit of your heart?
Yeah, I mean, I think to some degree, yes. You know, like, I'm gonna be an imperfect watchdog for preachers and sneakers because I don't know sneakers like men did. That was part of the reason that this platform was so successful and effective, is because Ben sees a sneaker and he knows it. He was in like sneakers sales, the side market. I don't even know the terms, you know. So I see him like, oh, is that like Jordan or is that, you know, Gucci? I don't know. So that's just something that I don't have and I don't bring to the table. But I think you're right. Like, I want to have those conversations. In fact, I'd love to sit down with Mike Todd or, you know, with Ed Young and just have a conversation. You know, tell me what you think about money, or tell, you know, however we want to phrase that question. Because they're legitimate questions, but I also believe that they may have legitimate answers. You know, to take Mike Todd, I followed his story. I got a lot of respect for him. I followed his story, and Transformation Church probably like before it really like took off, and know a little bit about how he got to be in that role, and I think he's a terrific preacher. One of their core values that I saw on their website is excellence. And I think that's such an interesting like background, like lens to have as you look at what he's doing on stage. And the example I'll give is like, I'm not super big into Broadway, but I can imagine there's a difference in watching like a third grade version of The Lion King and like The Lion King on Broadway. And somehow there's got to be like there's an analogy to what he's doing at his church. Like, if they are heavy performance based, which again, like, that just isn't my thing. So like, I don't appreciate it probably for what it is, and I'm gonna have maybe more questions or more, you know, more concerns, for lack of a better word. But some people love, like, they are moved by amazing performances and like, you know, this idea of like excellence on stage, like from afar, like not knowing enough and not following him super, super, super closely or anything. But like some of the performances I've seen, I'm like, I would probably grant him that there's a level of excellence that goes alongside with some of these performances, whether I agree with them or not. Right. So there's some consistency, or, you know, I give him some credit there, maybe. But that's just one example. But I would love to talk to him because it's a fair question. Like, not, you know, eyes are on you, and so fireworks, or no, I don't know if there's actually been fireworks or not, but I would imagine like fireworks and whatnot on stage on a Sunday morning, or like you say, like pouring syrup, maybe is what you said on the Bible. Like, I do, like, I sigh, and I'm kind of like, I just don't, I don't know.
I don't see it.
I don't see it. That wouldn't do much for me. It's also not about me. So it's where it's a hard conversation, but again, it is worth having, because in some ways, like, the more you know, like, the more someone could hear Mike Todd just like, here's the question, here's the answer, like, at least then you can reckon with that. You can say, I agree or disagree. I'm not going to watch this. I'm not going to go to this church. I'm not going to support this ministry. Like, we still have the freedom for that. So that's where it's tough too, because now, like, we do have access in this day and age to every single church's Sunday morning service, every single church's, maybe not their books, but like just the realities of these churches that have always, the small churches that have been geared toward one specific community, covenant community. And now even folks who are not in that, you know, meaningfully as a member, as part of that community itself, like as a neighbor, are speaking into it.
Yeah.
And there is value to that. And there's also this level of like, I I'm not in it, you know?
Right.
So it's hard, and that's maybe not the answer that social media wants to hear, but I think it's true, and I think the more we can actually have conversations that are just allowing there can be a lot of the truth is made up, I think, of a lot of different objective truths, but seeing the full truth,
Right.
you know, can be difficult and actually require a good bit of like intention.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's super encouraging so far, just speaking with you, is hearing the wrestle that I can see that's in your spirit, right? Because you could tell that you don't want to be divisive. You're not trying to create a lack of unity in the faith, but you are doing a great job of watchdogging. And I love what you said. Like, let's sit down, let's have the conversation, right? If it moves people closer to Jesus, we should have that conversation. If it precludes people from coming to Jesus or creates an offense or creates a stumbling block, then it is actually anti-scriptural for us not to have the conversation. Right. And, I had mentioned before, we have a local pastor here that had refused to come on the show to have this conversation and had come in under scrutiny recently about some of the expenditures that were happening on a personal level. And a staff member of his that's no longer on staff sent me a DM and was mentioning things that I won't expose because it's not my job to do that, nor should I. But it was unique because in my mind, if I'm living above reproach, one of the things I said in episode 1 of Business of Church is I said, wild transparency creates wild trust, right? So like in my marriage with Kiana, my wife, we have a open phone policy. It's not because I'm concerned she's going to go through my phone,
Right.
but if at any moment she wants to, she has the right to, because I have nothing to hide. And what's interesting is the more open I am about the open phone policy, I don't know if she's ever actually gone through my phone at all. And vice versa. Why would I? Right? Because with such wild levels of transparency creates such wild levels of trust. And I think what and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what I feel like you're getting at is kind of like, let's have the conversation.
Exactly.
Right? What would that conversation look like in a constructive way? Just your opinion. I'm just curious, how would you see that going, and what would that format look like?
So the one thing I would say before I answer your question is this idea that we I'm an imperfect human being. Like I am going to create stumbling blocks because I fail regularly, because I like don't, humbly have an interaction with someone, because I misspeak and don't mean to. So that's one reality of this idea that I agree with, of trying to be as welcoming as possible, but I am limited. I am human and I am limited, as are you. And anyone else who believes is limited. Jesus was the perfect preacher in sneakers because he was perfect and holy and God in the flesh. So I want that to be just a asterisk, or however you want to say it. But I mean, as far as the conversation goes, and I agree with you on the transparency thing, because and maybe that's the blessing and the curse of social media. It has created some transparency, but not all of it is transparent in it's all framed.
Nope.
You're watching 60-second clips, or maybe you're digging in deeper than that, but everything's framed. So that's part of the transparency issue. I actually serve with a nonprofit in Dallas, and our director, Lane Kipp is his name. It's called All Access International. And he went into the nonprofit sector intending to be more transparent than anyone in the field at all. So we show every single expense. We show exactly what came in, what goes out, exactly what we're doing. We report regularly. We have the people that we support report regularly. Anyways, it's kind of a tangent, but it's a good thing.
Yep.
And people can log in and see exactly where their dollars are going at all times. And I don't know how often they do it or not, to your same point. Like, because they can, I don't know what that looks like, but sidebar. But anyway, as far as the conversation goes, the shorter answer is I'm not entirely sure. The other answer is like I would love to just address the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
Like, hey, you've been featured on Preachers and Sneakers uh a number of times. You know, fill in the blank person.
Right.
I'd be curious, like, from them personally, like, how'd that make you feel? Like,
Yeah.
what did that do? How did it impact your ministry, if at all? Um, you know, I've talked to a couple of folks who've said, I saw that account and I immediately stopped wearing Jordans on stage. Jonathan McCluda was one recently that said that. Um, so that's one angle too. He wasn't featured, but like that was his response. Others, maybe it had no impact, but I would be curious kind of that angle of it. And then, not that I think anyone necessarily needs to like defend themselves, but I would be curious if someone was willing to say, like, you know, just tell me about your relationship to money. Tell me about how you talk about wealth in the church. How do you, like, if this is a concern, like, can we legitimately talk about how you might address this fellow believer or non-believer and say, like, this is why I drive this. This is why I think I'd love to have the opportunity to do that. Again, it's hard because I don't know if people will be excited to try and come in and defend themselves, but the point would be like to, in theory, expand everyone's viewpoint on, a number of factors.
Well, and I think it goes back to transparency. If I have nothing to hide, I have nothing to defend.
Right.
Right. And I think that is the intriguing part about the lack of transparency when questioned. There's another page.
But the irony though is that in some ways they're fully transparent because some of these pastors are literally on stage being filmed, like, like on the Instagram, like these screenshots are from their own Instagrams. So in some ways they're like wildly transparent. Now maybe we don't have the like figure. I know what you mean, but the irony there is funny. Like they're not hiding this. Yeah.
Right. Well, and I think it goes back to the conversation, right? Because if I can sit across the table from somebody who maybe I don't see eye to eye out with, and have an open conversation, which we're not doing enough in America. I mean, take any subject, vax versus anti-vax, politics, Republican, Democrat, whatever it might be, is so unique because both sides are so convinced that they are right. Right, because on the other side of this conversation, I've spoken to a few folks who don't think the way that we've heard more of the popular vote go towards, and are saying they wrote a book. It's a New York Times bestseller. They made 15-20 million. Why? I mean, what? Why should they drive a Range Rover?
Right.
Why shouldn't they wear the sneakers? Right. I mean, it's not their fault their YouTube has 26 million subscribers. It's not their fault their Instagram has this, that they did a concert tour and they wrote all this music and they have record labels. I mean, so that's where it goes back once again to the conversation. If I'm a believer or a non-believer, if I am the judge and the jury, which God has not called me to be, then it creates a tension point, an angst almost within my spirit of frustration and anger towards it. But what I've always found is when I've disagreed with someone who is passionate about what they believe, the more I communicate, the more that I try to get a vantage point on their perspective, more times than not, I am able to find common ground, or if at least find a mutual understanding that makes me go, hey, I thought I didn't like you at all. Right. Turns out you're not the Antichrist. You're just, you just like Jordans, right? Like, right. And so that I'm so hopeful that with your influence on this page in the sway that you have, that we're able to have these conversations, because I believe it's important not only for the church, but I think it's important for the non-churched as well to have a pastor and sit down and communicate like that.
I agree. And like ultimately, as you're saying that, what I'm thinking is like, gosh, like the hope is conviction. And that conviction may fall on the audience, may fall on the pastor.
That's right.
You talk about those conversations or an account like this, like the hope is not shame, it's freedom, that is in a lot of ways the gospel,
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I think I would love for people to be spurred on in their relationship to the church and wealth and whatnot. And that to that point too, like my personal like relationship to money has like drastically changed since becoming a believer. And not necessarily like were those things uh they were coincident. I don't know if one was a causation or not, but now I think about it, I'm like, yeah, like my belief in Christ has to affect my understanding and what I would call stewardship of money. Just this idea of like, hey, I've been given something to manage. Of course, that includes time and talent, and treasure is what we're really talking about here. But I would challenge folks who have concerns with what they see on the Instagram page, as I would challenge myself, is like, do I know where my money's going?
Yeah.
Like, am I stewarding what I have been given before I, I'm ready to like have an opinion about how someone else is stewarding what they have.
Come on.
So I would love for that to be part of the conversation too, is like, how do we steward well? Like, what does that look like in my specific situation? Again, kind of the like reframing the idea of preacher and sneakers, but like not only do I know where my money's going, like do I have a budget, but like, am I maxed out? Am I unnecessarily so? Do I think I have to go out to brunch after church? And like I can get into the whole like personal finance space as well, which shout out to Dave Ramsey. I paid off my student loan with his plan years ago, and that really started it. And then I'll say like Craig Groeschel's one that I listened to a ton, Life Church. He's been featured a couple times on Preachers and Sneakers, but man, like one of their core values is extravagant generosity, and his teaching on money and wealth has like radically impacted how I see it in a very, very, very positive way.
Yeah.
So I just point that out to say, like, again, I think it's a big conversation that I would love to have, that I think the church would benefit from, that's more than simply images and prices.
Yeah. Well, I think that's maybe one of the most important things that we've covered so far in our conversation, is that I don't think you're as far leaning towards one direction as I think maybe a lot of people perceived it to be, including myself. And it's really helpful. And I think if I'm a pastor out there and I'm hearing this and I'm watching this, maybe that encourages the conversation to happen of saying, hey, we're just seeking transparency. I'm not seeking clickbait. I'm not seeking to sow disunity in the church. I'm not wanting you to lose sheep. I just want to have the conversation that people want to have, and understanding that. I want to pivot a little bit here. And so, you kind of created a nice segue about personal finance. And one of the topics that we've talked about on the show is tithing. We've talked a lot about, I share this one story, and it's a funny one, but I was invited to this men's group, and it was a 12-week men's group. And the first few weeks, I was new to the church and I was kind of excited to be able to get invited. It was with the pastor, and I was like, oh, cool. I think I'm kind of like which is so silly, but I'm just full transparency. And so show up in about week 3, I start kind of looking around the room, and I'm like, well, that guy like owns a business, and that person is like a successful entrepreneur, and this person is high up in corporate America. And I basically realized that every single person in the room was somewhat financially successful. And it dawned on me, and immediately I felt cheated. I felt jaded. I felt almost dirty in a way, used even, of saying like, oh, I get why I'm here. I understand it now. It wasn't because I'm Stanley. It's not because of the call of God on my life from the standpoint of what I can bring to the table outside of financial means. And it just felt cheap to me. And it was interesting because of that group, there was 5 of the guys that were in a men's group that we later on were going to go into. And all of them radically generous people. And it was interesting that 12-week group ended, and the following week was a radical generosity Sunday. And it just drove home this feeling of I'm only valuable here based on the dollars and cents that I bring, not on the man that I am, the father that I am, and the attendee, right? Am I less valuable than the college student who can barely put gas in their tank but serving faithfully in kids' church? Am I more valuable than the person working the screen in the back to make sure the words are up there on the proper time? And the truth is, I'm the least of these people. And yet, because when you look at Jesus in the New Testament, he looks at the widow who puts the 2 mites in and goes, she's given more than all. And I just felt so hurt by that. And it was an interesting turning point in my faith, because I started to feel this way. Well, come to find out, of that group of 5, one of those men walked away from the faith completely and moved to a completely different state, is refusing to speak to any of us. One of them completely stopped tithing. Actually, 2 of them completely stopped tithing in general because of it. It felt like, oh, I understand what this is about now. One of them is still in the church and still tithing regularly. And myself, we still tithe because I believe it's scriptural. But I'm curious your take on tithe, offerings, just for you personally and to your comfort level, obviously. But just curious your take on tithe specifically.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for sharing that. That uh, that's one of those things that kind of makes your stomach turn.
Yeah.
You know, the build up to the giving Sunday, and like, that's where it sort of feels like money's getting abused. Like, just to hear your like perspective on that, and I'd be curious. You know, don't talk about it now, but just be curious how you, if and how you shared that with leadership at that church. I think you said it was. But for me, like, I do tithe. I I find it to be very important. I would encourage people to tithe, because I also believe that it's, you know, in scripture we're called to do that. However, like, the New Testament, I think, commands us to give, maybe not a tithe as some people think of it as 10%, even though, you know, if you count up the tithes within the Old Testament, it was far more than 10%. But I think the New Testament calls us to give in light of the gospel. In the gospel, Christ gave everything. Right. So with that as a model, am I giving enough? Probably not. You know. Right. However, I like and was taught by some dear friends who actually, it was their family that I was sort of saved through in some ways. They were the preachers and sneakers in my life that kind of got me finally there, by God's grace. But they tithed, and that's how I got into it and have just maintained it as a habit. I personally like the discipline of it. It makes me feel like, we were talking to Chris earlier about kind of the undulation of like faith, and how you have those seasons that are highs and lows on your walk with God. And I've loved the tithe, for me, has been in a way to just, hey, I've got skin in the game constantly. Like, I am acting out. It's a very tangible way for me to demonstrate this is what I believe. And I think that's true about like, just in general, you know, if someone pulled up your expenses and your budget, or say your calendar, like, you can learn a lot about a person based on what's on the calendar, and where the purse is, like where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And it's true whether you like it or not. It's true. So I feel strongly about the tithe. I encourage people to tithe. I've probably softened a little bit over the years, because again, like, not wanting to be coercive.
Right.
But I just have found it to be such a genuine, like, joy and like opportunity for my faith to grow, that like, that's what I'm selling, is like, this is good for you, like, or it's been so good for me, like, that I want this for you. Yeah. You know. And that can be difficult, though, for pastors on stage who are like, this is good for you. Give tithe here, tithe to me. That, you know, I see the irony, and probably the just, that's a hard ask. It could probably feel, whether they are intending for it to or not feel coercive. It's I see the reality of that. And I think I try to give to my local church. I'm not sure what the exact percentage is right now that I'm giving to my local church, but I'm fed there. So like I want to invest in what they're doing. It is not, in fact, our church actually we don't pass the bucket. I don't even know if we do pledge for. I don't think we do. I think it's just purely like as people feel led, they're there's a slot that they can put a check in, or I give online, or so from that standpoint, I like that a lot. Now I realize not all churches may have the means to like be able not to pass the plate, so I'm not condemning passing the plate or anything. I just say it as a reference point. But I think it's important to give. I think it helps us structure our lives. Like I think it was Andy Stanley. It's like give first, save second, live on the rest. Give, save, live. I literally structure my budget that way, and I've done that for like a decade now, based on that teaching of like, again, give first, whatever percentage it is, give first, save second, live on the rest. And it's just a tremendous discipline, and I've seen fruit from it. I'm not preaching like the prosperity. There's certainly not prosperity gospel, but like Proverbs would support it. Like it's a wise way to live and manage what you've been given. So I would encourage anyone, like, if you are not giving something, I would try it. Like, you can always stop. That's in fact the first time I tithed. I was at an Episcopal church at the time, and I just said to myself, like, I kind of feel called to do this, but like, this is so much money, and then granted, like, it wasn't that much money at the time, but it was to me. And I was like, I'll just stop. If it's no good, if I can't do it, like, I'll just stop. And I just never stopped. And in fact, just kept feeling like called to give more, and like, have had really cool moments of either provision or, blessing can mean a lot of things, but just things associated with these, what have felt like, sacrificial gifts, or like risky gifts, where you really have that pit in your stomach and you're like, really, really, really trusting you here. Like, how's this going to wind up? So anyways, a little long-winded, but I feel very, very strongly about, how giving can grow us in our personal faith.
The reason I want to ask the question is because I think it's so interesting for somebody who's watching this, who's following the account. I mean, the natural reaction, I think, if somebody, you put them on the stage, or like, do you think she gives? Do you think the person who owns this account is like a steady tither and has done it for years? I'd venture to say most people would say no, right? And so to hear that is an important discipline in your life. And I agree 100% with you. I think that the reason I tithe is because it drives greed out of my life. Mm-hmm. It hurts. And like, good things, one of the things the Holy Spirit shared with me a long time ago, and I've said it on the show multiple times, is it's interesting that we attribute pain and soreness in physical aspects as a growth thing. But in life, or in our career, or in our faith, man, your marriage goes through something, you never attribute it to like, well, this is great, we're getting better, we're getting stronger.
Well, the New Testament even talks about pruning.
Exactly.
I love that line, though.
Right? So it's like, you talked about being an athlete and running the 1 mile and the 2 mile and having the discipline to stay on track and to keep your discipline and your breathing right and your cadence right. And the truth is like, I think what giving does for me is it stretches me purposefully, and it hurts. And, talking about those ties, one of the things that Kiana and I always talk about, my wife, is that we are going to be a family of generosity. Where one of the things we always talk about, we have show up culture. It's not, we don't want to ever be the family that says, hey, just let us know if you need something. We're just going to show up. We're going to mop your floor. We're going to bring you a dinner. We're going to do something like that. And so I think it's important for the people that are watching, listening to this, to know this is not an anti-tithe podcast. This is not an anti-tithe platform.
And by the way, like, any person does have the option to choose where they give.
Right.
And I do think that we should be, again, thoughtful stewards of not only where we give, but how the gift is used. Like, I think that is a fair component, just like you would invest. Like, if you go and put money into the market, like, you're probably going to watch what happens within your portfolio. And like, if you need to, sell at some point, or, find a different money manager, or however you want to look at it, like, that's a legitimate, that is part of stewardship also, like, because it is an investment in God's kingdom. So yeah, it's twofold. You do get, it's the choice to give,
Right.
and then it's the choice where to give and to follow up on it, and to, maybe it's, for folks too, it's not just a gift financially, but it's also like, hey, I'm going to give to the kids ministry at my church, and I'm going to go serve in it.
Come on.
So like, again, it's just a bigger question, that I know, but it's just a bigger question than just a do this or don't do this.
That's right.
And by the way, there's a ton of wonderful Christian organizations that are doing great work for God's kingdom too, that may not live. I know folks feel differently about all goes to the local church, or, not, and goes to, side organizations, but that's a question for another day.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I think when we're talking about money in church, the reason that it's taboo is because we don't do it enough.
Right.
Right? Like, this is like kind of a crude example, but I think it does speak to it. Is like, there's like the joke of like the kid who like was in private school or homeschooled their whole life, and they go off to college and they go wild, right? Because they had no exposure to like anything outside of that. And some people didn't, but I think it's unique because I think the exposure of something helps people understand it, has the conversations. Like, I told my wife with her son, the first time he finds out about pornography or sex is not going to be from his friend. It's going to be like his dad will sit down with him, and I'm going to have a conversation about like, hey buddy, this is why you have those feelings, and this is what those things are, and how to place them and what to do with them. And, the Bible talks about taking captive every thought of the enemy. Right. And you want to train up yourself as a believer. When he talks about putting the armor of God, oftentimes we think of that as only a defensive mechanism.
Right.
But there's a sword, and the sword is of the Spirit. Right. And we talk about it's a double-edged sword. And so I think there's a lot of Christians out there that are living their life just taking the fiery darts from the devil. They're not putting on their armor. If they are, they're only defensive postured. And they're not saying, let's go take back some ground. Right? Let's have the conversation that needs to be had with the pastors that it needs to be had with. And if there's a lack of transparency, let's dive into that. Because I think for the volume, I always say, like, just because something is loud doesn't mean it's the majority. Right?
Or that it's right.
Or that it's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. And so I think that you have a predominant amount of pastors that are living a great life that is above reproach. And they're living a life that is exactly how God would intend it to be. And I think that they outweigh the few who do not. But I think that the few that do not have such a platform that it can create a challenge.
And like, just to that point, like, I think we have to be careful in saying, I know the few who do not.
Right.
Like, to me, that's even like kind of a nerve-wracking assertion to make. And some of it's like, like putting yourself in those shoes, like, sort of like, yeah, would I do that? But also like, really, would I do that if I had those resources? Like, if I could drive a Range Rover, like, would I? Yeah, maybe, probably. They're awesome. Like, probably drive a black one. It would look really cool. Like, it would be fresh, like, I can see myself, my little dog in the back seat, like, it would be looking good in that. I say that in jest, but that, and then the other thing that I would say that I come back to this, and I wish I could remember who to attribute it to, but it applies here in this context of this conversation, and it also applies as we see pastors fall on occasion, which I think these two things sort of go hand in hand. But it was a sermon at the chapel at Dallas Theological Seminary, and this preacher the person preaching was preaching to a bunch of folks who were going to be headed into ministry, and he said, "Look, if you ever see something in the paper or on social media, and you see a pastor and you're tempted to say, 'Wow, like, I can't believe that,' or just disparage them in any way, you stop yourself right there and you say, 'That could have been me,' because we are all like this far away from sin at any given moment, every single one of us, no matter how long you've been a believer, how like briefly you've been a believer, like this far. And I just mentioned that because it's just so easy these days for us to make not even grand, but just speak with such confidence, and also as we should in some ways, and also create space for like curiosity.
Yeah. You're leading a page that has hundreds of thousands of followers. You have a tremendous amount of say-so, tremendous amount of swing in the Christian faith today. It's worldwide. It's not just localized to a single spot. I think if anybody who's listened to this got to learn a ton about your heart behind the page, your vision for the page, and that was really the heartbeat behind this more than anything. I guess what I want to end with is if you had a message, maybe to a believer or non-believer, to a member, a follower of your page, what message would you want to convey to them tonight as kind of like, hey, here's what's to come. Here's what here's my desire. And is there anything you'd want to say to those folks?
Yeah, well, again, I'm thrilled to get to talk through this. This gets me really excited for this season that we're in, and I hope we can do this again. But I'd probably say the message is probably twofold. For one, like, I hope folks will stick around and have the conversation. Like that is the hope, like I want the conversation to be spurred on by what challenges you're on challenge face, like what challenges people really are struggling with that is preventing them from a meaningful relationship with Jesus Christ, from considering it, from moving forward in it, from, other church hurts, whatever it is. Like, let's talk about it. Like, I would love to be a conduit for that conversation. And if there's people that we want to pull in, let's do it. Like, it is totally possible. And, it will all happen, I hope, through this lens of like, hey, I'm called to be a preacher in sneakers. And so the second piece of this, which I hope is just adamant clue, is like the gospel message is this: that Jesus Christ, fully God, came to earth, fully man, and he lived the perfect, sinless life that I could not live, that you could not live, that no one could live. And he died the death that I should have died. He descended into hell, but he rose again on the third day. And he defeated death. He sits eternally at the right hand of the Father, and he's coming back. And so that's what matters. That's what matters in this conversation and every conversation, is that we bring people to the knowledge of that truth, that free gift of grace through Jesus Christ.
That's incredible. What a way to put a cherry on top of an incredible episode. I want to thank you for your vulnerability. Thank you for sharing your vision. More importantly, thank you for wrestling with this subject that needs to be wrestled with, that needs to have someone advocating and watchdogging and doing what you're doing. You have a partner with us at Challenge of Faith. We love what you're doing. We support you 100%. We'd love to have you back, but just really thankful for the time you've given us and just being on the show.
Thanks, Stanley. This was an awesome conversation.
Yeah.
Looking forward to more.
That was great. Thank you.